Imagine, you're at the movie theater in late 2025 when you see a teaser trailer for an upcoming adaptation of a classic novel. The teaser completely entices you with its glimpse of the grandiose visuals, cinematic reimagining of Charlie XCX's Everything is Romantic, and the carnal chemistry between the two lead characters. As time moves forward, you impatiently anticipate the film's release. However, as the release date gets closer and closer, the noise around the film becomes loud and oversaturated with ranging takes and opinions concerning the interpretation of the story. Finally, you watch the movie and it's nothing it was promised to be by the marketing nor the conversation around the film. This is the case of Wuthering Heights. Hello, my name is Blade, and let's talk about Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is a 2026 film adaptation of the classic novel written by Emily Bronte. This film is the latest adaptation in a long line of on-screen versions of the Bronte novel. This adaptation of the story is written and directed by Emerald Fennell and stars Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi in the classic roles of Kathy and Heathcliff. So, why would a story that's been visited so many times before cause such controversy and discourse? Well, honestly, it was kind of doomed from the start, just like Kathy and Heathcliff. There's a lot of factors that played into the conversation around the film. However, the primary culprit, I'd say, was the major mismarketing on behalf of Warner Brothers. So let's discuss how the mismarketing of Wuthering Heights ultimately sabotaged the film and took away from its true intent. In September 2025, the first teaser for Wuthering Heights was released online as well as in theaters. At this point in time, all was well. It was the public's first glimpse at Emerald Fennell's version of the story. Sure, there was some conversation around the teaser from people not liking the perceived interpretation, the casting of Elordi as Heathcliff, and apprehension from classic literature fans. However, I wouldn't say there was widespread disdain. There was still curiosity around the project. In other words, people were waiting to see what it would be when it actually released. However, this did not last. As the film's release date approached, the marketing rollout began. The official poster was released and put up in theaters with the tagline, "Come Undone." Still, things were relatively fine with minimal pushback. This all changed when the trailer dropped and the full spectacle of the marketing campaign unleashed. The trailer very quickly explained the decision to use the tagline "Come Undone." This isn't to say the teaser didn't hint at some sensual and potentially erotic tones in the film, but the trailer fully committed to this aspect. Come Undone was accompanied by Drive Me Mad, with the trailer promising a film full of provocative visuals and steamy encounters. This was further elevated by the announcement that British artist Charlie XCX contributed the film's soundtrack. Again, this was already known prior to the teaser trailer even. However, going forward, they really heavily leaned into this as a marketing point. As the weeks went on, Warner Brothers continued this provocative, taboo marketing, not only in the TV spots and online advertisements, but also pushing out a strange and outdated marketing strategy of creating wild stories around Robbie and Elordi's behind-the-scenes relationship. This was pushed so far that Robbie's husband publicly commented on how offensive the whole ordeal was, with many online accusing Robbie and Elordi of an affair. This type of marketing strategy is honestly tone deaf by today's standards and straight up absurd, because while some people might be fooled, I think the vast majority can see through the disingenuous nature of it. Also, it puts the actors in an uncomfortable position as well, because they probably have to go through these things for contract purposes. Overall, Warner Brothers was committed and hell-bent on marketing this film as a provocative, somewhat erotic endeavor, heavily leaning into the forbidden nature of Kathy and Heathcliff's relationship. They doubled down on this by having all the promotional material say "This Valentine's Day," despite the film releasing on the 13th of February, a day before. However, I don't think I have to point out why they opted for this release window, considering the picture they were painting. Now, all of this on its own could be somewhat forgiven, especially if the movie delivered on these promises. However, this is only the tip of the iceberg. The marketing of Wuthering Heights was enough on its own to spark conversation and discourse, especially in the modern age of the internet where seemingly everything warrants hot takes and moral evaluation. If this film was a separate entity, maybe this wouldn't be the case, but its long standing history in pop culture and classic literature was always going to bring with it differing opinions. However, I wouldn't say that this is purely why controversy arose. There was a perfect storm brewing, and the film hit at just the right time. First and foremost, these days the internet is pretty vicious regarding the casting choices of certain characters. What I mean by this is people are tired of actors being cast in roles that are overtly or even presumed to be people of color. Now, obviously, I have no issue with this. There are several characters out there where their race or their heritage is really important to the story, so these characters should be played by actors who represent that and fit the bill. However, there are times where races are swapped or, people are played by someone of a different skin color and people get up in arms about it, and it's very clear it's purely the result of racism. For example, when bigots were upset Halle Bailey was cast as Ariel in Disney's The Little Mermaid live-action adaptation. Sure, Ariel in the original animated film was fair-skinned, but the color of her skin has nothing to do with the story whatsoever, and she's a fictional mermaid at the end of the day. It doesn't matter. In fact, I think it's great for kids to see an iconic character played by someone who doesn't always get those types of roles. On the other hand, however, let's say they made a live-action version of The Princess and the Frog. Tiana is a black character, and the culture showcased in that film is a large aspect of the movie. I don't think I have to point out the ways in which having her portrayed by a white actress would be offensive. My whole point in mentioning this is that these are conversations that have been taking place on the internet for quite some time in recent years, and it was only amplified by the Little Mermaid controversy. Not to mention, these are hot topics, and rightfully so, considering the current state of the union in the US. So, as you can imagine, when Elordi was announced to be playing Heathcliff, it was an all-around warm reception. Heathcliff in the novel is more than hinted to be a black character, which very much so plays into the dynamic between him and Kathy. Now, obviously, the news of him in the role was announced months and months prior to the heat of the discussion around the film, but this was brought back into conversation, provoked by the overwhelming surge around the film. Additionally, it's no secret that when something becomes popular or seen as successful, people want to tear it down and be contrarians for the sake of being a contrarian. Jacob Elordi had just starred in Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of Frankenstein. His performance as Frankenstein's creature was arguably the most praised and appreciated aspect of the film, so much so that it earned him a Best Supporting Actor nomination at the 98th Academy Awards, as well as all the major precursors. He even took home the win at the Critics' Choice Awards.
Yeah. Bloody hell. Yeah, okay, I really didn't plan from it.
So, while Wuthering Heights was in full swing, Elordi was also simultaneously in the middle of his Oscar campaign. He had been adored up until this point with his roles in Euphoria and Saltburn, but he was now being taken seriously as an actor and talked about at length during the very prolonged 2026 awards season. But this is all happening in conjunction with the rollout and release of Wuthering Heights, and so it was truly the iron hitting while it was hot. This whole section is not me trying to imply that the race discussion around the film was unwarranted or that Elordi was the sole issue people were taking with Wuthering Heights. There is a whole plethora of things being said, as aforementioned. However, the Oscar campaign and pre-existing conversation really primed people to hate something they hadn't even seen yet. On February 13th, Wuthering Heights was released in theaters, and if the floodgates weren't already open, they definitely were at this point. The reviews from audiences came pouring in, and they were surprisingly not totally scathing, but they were definitely lackluster. General audiences averaged the film out at 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Letterboxd reviewers averaged the film out at 2.7 out of 5. Now, 2.7 isn't great, but in combination with the 76% from Rotten Tomatoes, this makes the overall reception lukewarm. The ratings, however, are not the point of interest. It's the context of the reviews that are intriguing. The general commentary, discourse, and complaints around the film at this point were hyperfixated on the eroticism of the film. I should also add this came paired with people feeling the movie falls flat or isn't all that interesting, which ironically is interesting considering the annoyance over the erotic elements. But here's the thing. The movie isn't all that provocative, nor does it contain that many sensual sequences. That's not to say it's totally void of it, that simply wouldn't be true, but it's maybe 5 to 10% of the runtime, if even. There's a scene early on where Kathy and Heathcliff witness a kinky exchange between two servants. Kathy at one point stuffs grass into Heathcliff's mouth during a verbal argument, which prompts this.
Let go of my hand.
Never.
And towards the end, Heathcliff has a dark arc where he takes a wife who he treats like a dog. Now, don't get me wrong, that last one is pretty provocative, but what I just listed is pretty much all that happens in the more provocative realm, and even then, the master-slave dynamic thing doesn't serve a sexual purpose in the plot, but more on that later. The majority of the runtime is focused on the relationship between Kathy and Heathcliff. Them meeting as children, when Kathy marries their neighbor Edgar Linton, causing Heathcliff to leave, and their affair when he returns years later. The more spicy stuff is littered in here and there, but is honestly pretty condensed. Also, it should be mentioned that the intimacy scenes between Kathy and Heathcliff, aside from one, occur in one montage where they are fully clothed. So what I'm getting at here is the movie, honestly, isn't really all that provocative, so why was the reaction so focused on this element that's barely present? The marketing. Warner Brothers painted this film out to be an all-out, steamy, and taboo experience in the same vein as something like 50 Shades of Grey. So, this is what people were expecting, but beyond that, people were already annoyed by this before seeing the movie with all the conversation that took place up to its release. So, inevitably, when the movie was released, I think it's safe to say opinions had already been formed and the alleged provocative nature of the film was widely over-exaggerated in reviews and reactions. The Guardian published an article highlighting some responses to the movie titled "Bored by All the Sex and Violins, Readers on Wuthering Heights." I think this is a prime example of the mismarketing's effect on the film's reception. Sure, the score and the soundtrack feature a decent amount of violin, but sex is not featured as often in the film as this headline would suggest. Also, the violin comment is just kind of petty. Now, in all fairness, I do have to say I slightly understand where Warner Brothers might have been coming from, as Emerald Fennell's previous film Saltburn went pretty viral for some of its more provocative scenes. These include fornicating with a gravesite and, probably the most famous, Barry Keoghan's character drinking the leftover bathwater of the character played by Jacob Elordi. However, similarly to Wuthering Heights, these types of scenes were not very prominent in the film. Elordi even went on record saying he was surprised at the large response to these scenes, not finding them to be all that provocative.
I didn't think it was so extreme. I found the world's reaction to be slightly prudish, actually.
Oh, really?
Well, you know, cinema. There's so many films out there that are like infinitely more disturbing.
Additionally, these scenes did provide something to the themes of desire the film was illustrating. So I suppose Warner Brothers was trying to capitalize on that and entice audiences with indirect reminders of those moments, but they should have just been honest about what the movie would be. This is not to say that if the marketing was more honest that the reception would automatically be better, but it wouldn't have turned into the monster that it did and likely wouldn't do a huge disservice to the film. The marketing choices of Warner Brothers really failed the film and misrepresented what it actually is. I will say with full honesty that while I suppose we'll never know, I don't think different marketing would fix what people don't seem to like about this movie. there's definitely an audience for this film and then the people outside of that audience. Nevertheless, I do wish that the marketing would have spoken to what the film is at its core, more provocative Fennell touches aside, which is a film exploring power dynamics in relationships. There's a bit of dialogue delivered by Heathcliff to Kathy upon his return that I think is a great showcase of what the film is exploring.
You treated me infernally. Do you hear? Infernally. And if you flatter yourself that I don't perceive it, then you are a fool. And if you think a few sweet words will console me, then you are an idiot.
Kathy, whether she wants to admit it or not, didn't always treat Heathcliff the best, and furthermore, what she really doesn't want to confront is the power she has over him. Firstly, while Kathy's family isn't the richest around and does face financial ruin as the film progresses, her father was at one point decently established, so she automatically has some power over him in terms of status. Not to mention, her father, on a whim, decided to take Heathcliff in and, in his own words, allowed him to stay as some sort of pet companion to Kathy. In all fairness, Kathy is innocent to these developments, however, it does give her a certain level of power over Heathcliff, plus, it's safe to say she was a spoiled girl used to getting her way. Additionally, as the film reveals in its final scenes, Heathcliff expressed his love to Kathy thinking she was asleep when they were children, so you can recontextualize the rest of the film and Kathy's actions, knowing that she was aware of his feelings the entire time. Now, obviously, they both knew on a certain level how they felt for each other. It's quite obvious they've been yearning for each other. It's an open secret, but this information still does change things. I'd argue to say that it implies Kathy is somewhat aware of her power over Heathcliff, even if she plays it off as not malicious in spirit, which it's not, but it doesn't remove the fact that she was being emotionally manipulative to him for years. There's a scene that I originally felt was misplaced and was just a side effect of Fennell's more stimulating filmmaking, but now I think served to give us a look at the dynamic between Kathy and Heathcliff. Late one night, Kathy goes to talk to Heathcliff, during which she and Heathcliff end up being witness to two servants, Zyla and Joseph, engaging in kinky sex acts. It's not entirely clear what the hierarchy between them is in terms of occupation, but it is revealed later that Zyla left Wuthering Heights to marry a well-off man, leaving Joseph behind. This mirrors Kathy and Heathcliff. Zyla has some power over Joseph in the relationship, not to mention the taboo nature of it. Then she goes off to marry a man who is seen better in society, choosing comfort over love, not giving a second thought to the effect on Joseph. There's a few differences here, as it's obvious Kathy has immense remorse over her decision to marry Linton, regretting it pretty much immediately. However, the dynamics here are the same, as well as one abandoning the other in favor of comfort over love. While I understand the kinky element won't work for everybody, I kind of understand it being present. I think it represents the unbalanced power and how much the abused is willing to endure from the abuser to maintain and keep their love. This all doesn't go unresolved either. Wuthering Heights, I genuinely believe, is a wonderful example of how this abuse affects people. It teaches them that these dynamics are normal. When Heathcliff returns to Wuthering Heights and rekindles his relationship with Kathy, he throws her infernal treatment of him right back at her. While being in love with her and getting what he wants, he still is somewhat vindictively flipping their dynamic on its head. He dangles the affair aspect of the relationship over her, which only makes things more enticing for the pair because the forbidden element has already been normalized to them. This comes to a boiling point when Heathcliff says he wants to kill Linton so he and Kathy can be together. Kathy finally sees the horror of her torment of Heathcliff. She pushed him to this point. So she tells Heathcliff it must all come to an end and she throws him out. This causes him to retaliate against her by marrying Linton's sister Isabella. Not only does this hit Kathy right in the heart, but Isabella had expressed romantic interest in Heathcliff prior, so once again, there is a huge power and difference in the relationship, with Heathcliff going on to treat Isabella horribly. But Isabella endures this as she'd rather have that treatment from him than none at all. In the end, everything crashes and burns. Kathy falls ill and suffers a miscarriage, which eventually leads to her death. Heathcliff never gets to see Kathy again before she dies. Before the film cuts to the credits, we see moments between the two of pure bliss, happily in love despite them having an affair. This is what could have been, what they could have had without these dynamics being present. This doesn't absolve them of any of their decisions or torment over one another, but there is a tragic quality here. Finally, Heathcliff is left behind, Kathy abandoning him yet again. Sure, this time it wasn't her choice, but it undeniably is the result of her actions. It all comes full circle with Heathcliff being hurt in the end. He is never free of the love that Kathy dangled over him, the love he wanted but could never truly have, even at the very bitter end.
I have not broken your heart. You have broken it. And in breaking it, you've broken mine.
I just want to quickly say that this video essay is not my attempt to say you're wrong for not liking the movie or having your issues with it. It's not a perfect film by any means. Even though I personally like it, I know it has its flaws. My point is that I truly think the marketing of this film was abysmal and failed the film. It painted this wild, erotic picture fueled by passion and sex when, in reality, this rendition of Wuthering Heights to me was more interested in exploring power dynamics and emotional abuse. So that is what I have to say on Wuthering Heights. If you watched this whole thing, thank you very much. This is my first video essay in quite some time. I took a very prolonged break from my channel, and then I kind of had to get through some of my film promotion stuff, so I'm finally back making video essays again, and this felt like the perfect choice to return with because I don't know, I like this movie personally, and I feel like I think it just did so bad by the marketing. But also, like, if you liked this and you'd be interested, please let me know in the comments. I think Warner Brothers in general has a problem with mismarketing. Like, several of their very recent releases, I think, had wildly wrong marketing for what the movie actually was. I just chose to focus on this one because I feel a bit more passionately about it, and I think it was an extremely, like, egregious case, so it deserved its own video. But if you'd like to hear me talk about Warner Brothers' kind of mismarketing tactics in general in a different video essay, let me know if you'd be interested in that, because I would like to do it. It's in my notes as an idea, so just let me know. Additionally, though, I timed this just right because I know it. Wuthering Heights just came out on HBO Max, but also I got very inspired by the soundtrack, and it got my little brain going. So I did indeed make a performance art film that uses a couple tracks from the soundtrack. So if you're all interested in this movie or the soundtrack or performance art or supporting, you know, smaller filmmakers, check that out. It's called Invisible Ink. It comes out next week, like same day, Friday. I'm probably going to release it more like 11 as a premiere, but it'll be available on my channel right after that. I'd very much appreciate it. I put a lot of work into it. I think I really stepped out of my comfort zone and, like, amped up my production game. The trailer's on my channel right now, and you can go watch it. So if you'd like to watch it, I would very much appreciate it. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this, consider liking, subscribing, commenting. I'm a small filmmaker, but I also make a lot of film content and review films, different recommendation videos, things like that. So if you enjoy, I lost my whole train of thought. If you enjoyed, consider sticking around and tuning into more of my stuff. But as for right now, in this moment, that's all. So I will see you, yes, you, in the next one. This all happening in conjunction with the rollout of the release of Wuthering Heights was truly the iron hitting while it was hot. Damn, that little voice crack. He had been adored up until this point with his... Oh, damn it. Yeah, that was good. That was good. I'm glad I said that. Wuthering Heights is a 2026 film adaptation of the classic Bronte... Oh, damn. I always forget the bloopers, girl. Okay.